This video was brought to you by Mubi, a one-of-a-kind streaming service with hand-picked cinema classics from all over the world. Get your first month for free at www.mubi.com/filmradar. You've probably heard the phrase show, don't tell when it comes to screenwriting. Take for example this clip of Charlie Chaplin. Without a single word being spoken, we know exactly what's happening on screen. It's in the framing, it's in the timing, and the visual actions that are simple enough for anyone to follow. This is the foundation of visual storytelling, communicating ideas without the use of words. Unsurprisingly, this was the preferred method of storytelling throughout the silent film era, but you may be more familiar with its use in many of the different Hanna-Barbera or Looney Tunes animated shorts. The idea is pretty simple. Film is a visual medium of storytelling, so you should make use of that, instead of filming what Alfred Hitchcock would have called photographs of people talking. The problem with words is that they often fall short.
How are you feeling? Can you put it into words?
Nope.
There are certain areas of feeling and reality, Stanley Kubrick states, or unreality, or innermost yearning, whatever you want to call it, which are notably inaccessible to words. Music can get into these areas, painting can get into them, non-verbal forms of expression can, but words are a terrible straitjacket. 2001: A Space Odyssey has received both praise and criticism for its unconventional lack of dialogue, but Kubrick understood that the only way to breach certain emotions was with the non-verbal elements that film allow for, to show us, instead of tell us, what the story is all about. Much like the Charlie Chaplin clip that I showed you earlier, it's all in the framing, the timing, and the visual action on screen, of course with the addition of sound design seldom heard in films from the silent era. Take for instance the Dawn of Man sequence at the start of the film. After a fade-in, we open to a shot of a wide landscape at dawn. Obvious symbolic relevance aside, what do you think Kubrick is trying to tell us with these shots? Remember, he has control over everything we see and hear for the duration of the film, so you should always be asking yourself why we're seeing what we're seeing, why we're hearing what we're hearing. So let's try it this way. What do you hear? Nothing much, right? Just some nature sounds of insects chirping, eventually hearing wind and birds. Compare that to the all-music black screen intro before the MGM logo and the iconic and bombastic opening credit sequence with "Thus Spoke Zarathustra" drumming in our ears. This sequence is notably quiet, something to keep in mind for later. Okay, now let's switch. What do you see? I'm not talking about lenses or color palette or anything like that, just purely what occupies the frame. For roughly 1 minute and 40 seconds across 12 distinct shots, we see very little of anything living. We see the expanse stretching off into the distance, scattered with rocks and outgrowths of weeds, but nothing else, until the final 2 shots of the sequence clearly depicting animal bones. Kubrick wants us to be aware of the sort of environment that our early ancestors had to overcome, with limited food and water, in danger of natural predators and even others of their own kind, not to mention the environment itself. The opening of the screenplay highlights as much, describing a 10-million-year drought with our ancestors facing near extinction in the African drylands. But in the pursuit of true cinema, Kubrick takes those words and turns them into images that convey the same message. Alright, let's skip ahead a bit. After an altercation with a rival tribe forces them to leave their source of water, they retreat to safety and wait out the night all huddled together. When they awake, we can immediately tell that something has changed by paying attention to the sound. Music. It's no coincidence that the first music cue during the Dawn of Man sequence plays right alongside the introduction of the monolith. And if we look at the design of the monolith itself, it's clearly not something made by nature, with its perfectly straight lines and smooth surface. Again, no words spoken, and we can understand that something significant is happening. What exactly isn't clear to us just yet, but will be soon. A quick cut takes us back to more establishing shots of the landscape, and then we come to Moonwatcher as he makes a new discovery. It's not the environment that's changed, but the man-apes who've now learned how to conquer it. This is the sort of cinematic language present throughout the entire film. All of the depth of the story is told with subtlety, with each subsequent viewing revealing more detail than the last. Simply by asking ourselves the right questions throughout the film, you can find deeper meaning in almost every scene. For instance, think of how little dialogue is present in the film, and yet there are two separate dialogue-driven scenes focusing on birthdays.
Think of anything else you want for your birthday? We wish you the very happiest of birthdays.
They may seem totally pointless at first, but the film devotes a lot of its time to illustrating our biological limitations, age certainly being one of them. And what else does a birthday represent if not the passage of time? Or you may notice the film frequently focusing on breathing, eating, or sleeping. And even at one point, the simple act of using the bathroom. All normal, everyday activities that become notably more complicated in space, attempting to show us, rather than tell us, the difficulties humans face when it comes to space travel, and how maybe someday we can enter the next stage of evolution that will allow us to overcome these obstacles. Now, all of this could have easily been explained with narration or some other form of verbal exposition, but instead Kubrick wants you to focus on the images and the sounds to understand the story, because before too long we wind up in a place that words would never do justice. A scene that's not meant to be explained in any traditional sense, but rather experienced. And even if Kubrick were to offer a concrete explanation, anything that he could provide would hold meaning to some and completely ruin the film for others. Sometimes things are just better left to the imagination. How could we possibly appreciate the Mona Lisa, Kubrick asks us, if Leonardo had written at the bottom of the canvas, "The lady is smiling because she's hiding a secret from her lover"? This would shackle the viewer to reality, and I don't want this to happen to 2001. It's one thing for someone like me to offer my own interpretations, but it's another thing entirely when the artist tries to explain everything, because they're seen as the authority on the subject and it can betray the potential for personal interpretation. Of course, many of you may be aware that recently there was an old interview with Kubrick that was dug up where he does exactly that, but I would suggest holding off on watching it until you've given the film a fair shake if you haven't already. One of the things that makes 2001: A Space Odyssey so special is that it forces you to think. It's not just a quick escape from reality that ties everything up at the end with a nice neat little bow on top. It presents many questions and tasks you with finding the answers for yourself. And for that, the film becomes a truly rewarding cinematic experience unlike any other. Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video. One of the biggest problems I have with other streaming platforms is never being able to find something to watch. It's like when I was a kid and I would spend more time flipping through channels than actually watching anything. Mubi offers something completely unique to other streaming platforms that entirely removes this problem. At any given time, they have just 30 films available for streaming. Each day, one gets added and one gets removed. And these aren't straight to the bargain bin picks either. These are hand-picked cinema classics from some of the world's most acclaimed filmmakers. You can get an extended free trial by heading over to www.mubi.com/filmradar, where you'll get your first 30 days for free to try out the service. Again, that's www.mubi.com/filmradar for a 30-day free trial. Thank you for watching. 2001: A Space Odyssey is actually my favorite movie of all time, so I was really excited about making this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. If there are any other Stanley Kubrick films that you would like me to cover in the future, just let me know in the comments, or any other films for that matter. I'm always happy to take suggestions. And as always, I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons for helping to support my channel. Even as little as $1 a month really goes a long way, and so if you enjoy the content that I do here, I would really appreciate you considering to become a patron. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.